Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. I am currently in the middle of a move from one house to another, so this will be the final time you actually see me with this backdrop. Very exciting stuff there, but also extremely stressful, because if you have ever moved in your life, you know all too well that it is a very involved process. So we are actually pre-recording this episode. As such, there will not be a news segment, but if anything happens in the meantime, we'll be sure to cover it next week. But that said, we have a lot to talk about. First off, we are going to celebrate 5 years of Animal Crossing New Horizons. Can you believe it? And then we will be discussing Xenoblade Chronicles X, and we'll finally round out the show with definitive ranking and the eShop Gem of the Week. So lots to get to, and joining me for all of that is Inverse's Hayes Madsen. Hayes, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Excited to talk about Xenoblade, one of my favorite Nintendo things to talk about.
Yes, you put out the call on Blue Sky saying, like, hey, if anybody wants to talk Xenoblade, I'm your guy. And I said, let's go in GIF form. So here we are, going. I'm very excited to talk about Xenoblade Chronicles X, because I will admit that the Xenoblade series is a bit of a blind spot for me in my Nintendo fandom. But that's what we are having you on here for, because I am going to dig into why we should care about this release in the main segment. But first, we do have a tried and true tradition here on All Things Nintendo. Whenever a guest makes their debut appearance, it is getting to know them through the lens of their history with Nintendo. It is first Nintendo game and favorite Nintendo game. So Hayes, the first part of that question, what was your first Nintendo game? You can interpret that in a number of ways, but I will just leave that up to you.
Yeah, so I was thinking about it, and I think my first Nintendo game was actually Star Fox 64.
Oh, nice.
Because I started playing games before that, but I played on PC, and my brother was a PlayStation guy. But then we got an N64, and he worked at Pizza Hut at the time, and one of their delivery drivers gave him Star Fox 64, and so I tried that, and I was obsessed with it. I mean, it's one of those games that just like changed my whole trajectory, and then I started playing the N64 way more than PS1. But favorite Nintendo game is probably a little bit of a dark horse pick, actually, because I think it's Fire Emblem Path of Radiance.
Oh, wow. What about that one is like, it like stands out to you from the rest of the series?
Yeah, it's by far the most like narratively ambitious game in the entire Fire Emblem series. Even more so than Three Houses. Like, Three Houses tries some different things, and it does that kind of like Persona-esque bonding system.
Mm-hmm.
But Path of Radiance was really like this incredibly ambitious narrative for Fire Emblem, much more so than the basic stories that series usually has. You have Ike, who is not a lord. He's the first Fire Emblem hero to ever not be like royalty. He's just a average dude. And then it has all these themes of like oppression and discrimination with the two different races in its world. And it's just the way that game tells its story and then kind of loops that into its tactical gameplay is still just one of my favorite things of all time. And that was where you saw a lot of the like progression of that series really hit, with like, it was the first game that had camp conversations where you could see the like bonds between characters were more fleshed out than just like a line of dialogue in a battle if they fight next to each other. So it was kind of like a big turning point for Fire Emblem, and I think that's why I like it so much.
Now, are you a Three Houses guy when it comes to like the modern franchise, or is there another game that sticks out as kind of like the best in the modern era of that series?
That's a little tough, because I would say that I like Three Houses from a story standpoint, but from a gameplay standpoint, it was a little disappointing to me. So I think Engage is probably the best from a gameplay standpoint. And then Three Houses, actually, I would say Three Hopes, the Dynasty Warriors one, is the best for modern Fire Emblem in terms of story, surprisingly.
You're a Musou guy, right?
Yes, I am, yeah.
Okay, so that explains a little bit of that. Like, for me, it's like, you know, I'm a big Zelda fan, as you could probably guess, as a guy who runs a Nintendo podcast. So I see a game like Hyrule Warriors or Age of Calamity, and I'm like, okay, these are fun diversions, but like, they will never be on the same level as like a straight up Zelda game for me.
Yeah.
But like, it's interesting to see that you, like, you know, Fire Emblem It's the franchise that has your favorite Nintendo game of all time, and you're like, actually, the best modern entry in that series is a spin-off title.
It's really weird. That game specifically really surprised me. I think that's part of it, is that Three Houses had a really interesting setup with its like three different kingdoms, but I think the back half after the time skip kind of squanders that idea a little bit. But then Three Hopes kind of delivers on that better, of showing these three different paths and how history would change based on which one you choose. So it's just ironic that it's the Muso game that I think does a better job than the original one.
Yeah, well, hey, you like what you like, right? Like, I don't know if I mean, I loved Persona 5 Strikers. I thought that was
I
actually a
love that too.
fantastic game, and I loved the implementation of kind of the turn-based mechanics built into the Muso style. But also, I just loved an excuse to hang out with my friends from that game because I love the cast of Persona 5 so much. So to have another excuse to do that was great. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm always going to be a fan of like those games as like spin-off standalone entities, but it's always going to come back to like the mainline franchise for me for both of those series anyway. I mean, there's always a chance that like I've never tried the Fire Emblem Warriors style game. Maybe I'll like it more than I like the mainline Fire Emblem franchise. I don't know, but
I have a couple friends that do. The first Fire Emblem Warriors is very much like a pie in the sky, like Super Smash Bros. Dream Team kind of event. So it's not entirely serious. But then Three Hopes is more serious.
It's kind of like how Hyrule Warriors and then Age of Calamity. It was like Hyrule Warriors, exactly. It's like a multiverse, like multiple timelines, and like you actually play as Ganondorf, which is really cool. And then like Age of Calamity is like, yeah, let's just like talk about like, yeah, it was a different timeline from what I understand, but like, let's tell an actual like canonical, I guess arguably canonical story about like trying to
when you get to the end of that game, you're like, oh, this isn't actually canonical.
But they tried to sell it as like, this is a prequel to Breath of the Wild, which I don't think they ever tried to sell the original Hyrule Warriors as.
No, not at all.
But before we jump into our first topic of discussion, a reminder that you can support all things Nintendo by subscribing to the Patreon page, which gives you early and ad-free episodes, as well as access to the community Discord for just $5 a month. And if you have been on the fence about joining a paid tier of the Patreon, I just introduced a $3 a month tier so you can dip your toe in and test the water. That tier gives you access to the community Discord, as well as priority for interactive episodes like Q&A or hot take episodes. And then you can also find my merch at teepublic.com. You can find various designs, including the controller outline ATN logos. I have a magnet of the ATN 64 logo. I don't know what outline that might be. But I have to say, it looks pretty good on my refrigerator. So you can find those and other designs on my shop at teepublic.com. So Hayes, let's talk a little bit of Animal Crossing New Horizons. When this game was announced, the last mainline Animal Crossing game was New Leaf, which had come out in 2012, which meant there was an 8-year absence for the main series. What is your history with Animal Crossing?
Yeah, I think the DS there wasn't one on the DS, was there?
I don't think so, because we got one on the GameCube. Let's bring up the franchise history here.
I want to say New Leaf, or the 3DS one might have been my first one, and then I went back and played the older games, because I didn't get it on GameCube. I remember seeing it and skipping it, because it didn't seem like my thing at that time.
And I'm mistaken, by the way. There was one on DS called Wild World.
Oh, that was the first one I played. That's what it was. And I played a lot of that. I remember at that time, because I think at that time you could change your internal clock on the DS and game it to get all the holidays. So I remember doing that a lot, just to like make it New Year's or Christmas or something, just to get special items or change the design of the town. I was obsessed with Wild World for a little bit. And I did play the one on Switch when it came out, like I think everyone in the world did, because it was just one of those games that was a phenomenon at the time. It was like you couldn't avoid it.
For sure. And that was my introduction into the series. Like, I tried so hard with New Leaf on 3DS, and I bounced off it like 3 or 4 different times, and I was like, I just don't get this franchise, and I don't think I ever will. And then this game, New Horizons, came out 5 years ago, and I was just like, oh, it's finally clicking with me.
Hmm.
And I was so happy that it did, because I ended up putting, I think, like something like 70 or 80 hours into it. Which I know is minuscule compared to a lot of people. Like former Game Informer production director Margaret Andrews, I think she said she put like 1,100 or 1,200 hours into New
Jeez.
Horizons. So
That is
yeah,
intense. Yeah. I think my partner hasn't played that much, but I think she did a good like 250. And her sister and her still kind of like occasionally play it here and there.
yeah. I fired it up. I want to say last year at some point, and I was like, yeah, I think I've moved on from this game, but it was a lot of fun while it
Hmm.
lasted. So let's jump into a little bit about the development of this game. And the team actually started working on New Horizons pretty much immediately after they shipped New Leaf, which means they started designing this game before the Switch even existed. So this was 2012. They started work on a new mainline Animal Crossing game. And New Leaf's game director, Aya Kyogoku, she actually came back to direct New Horizons as well. And then Hisashi Nogami, who is notable for being the creator and director of the Splatoon series, and Katsuya Eguchi, who is the creator of Animal Crossing, were the two producers. So pretty good pedigree there on the development side.
Hmm.
And
Interesting tidbit too. We'll be talking about Xenoblade. Monolith Software was an assist studio
they are that for like a lot of
on
like
a lot of things. Yeah.
big Nintendo games, in particular. When Monolith Productions, the Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War studio, was closed down a few weeks ago. Sadly, I did have to make that distinction. This is not the Nintendo owned Monolith. This is the Warner Brothers owned Monolith. It's quite confusing.
Hmm.
So as the team started working on the development for the next Animal Crossing game, their goal was to make it different enough from the previous game that it made it feel like something new, while still keeping the core of the series intact, so they wouldn't alienate longtime players. And one of the big differences was the setting of a deserted island to differentiate it from the village setting of other games. And they also use this as an excuse to implement a ton of new gameplay mechanics and also improved customization, which was spearheaded by adding a crafting system. That they did this because they wanted to give players more things to do, even if like the stores in the town were closed down, like for like nighttime or whatever. And then they also added the Nook Miles system to encourage players to try new things. So, as somebody who has been with the series for almost 2 decades now, what do you think was the most meaningful improvement of Animal Crossing: New Horizons?
Yeah, to me, I think it's probably the system of like Nook Miles and more tangible rewards. Because I think to me, Animal Crossing has always been a game that's like you kind of have to be in the mood for it because it's a completely free form experience, right? Like you do what you want, you go where you want. It's not fun unless you make fun of it. So I think Nook Miles helped someone like me where I have a little more guidance on what to do. I have a little more structure on what to do. There's still a lot of freedom there in how you go about it, but that sense of constant reward I think is really valuable in this game because it feels like you're not just wasting time. Like you didn't just spend 8 hours digging holes or something. You can actually get rewards for whatever you're choosing to do. And I do like the island setting too. I think it's having that self-contained island and then voyaging to other islands and finding exotic fruits or whatever. I think that it's a fun experience that does feel different from what that series has done before.
Yeah, and I think that the inclusion of the Nook Miles was so smart because, like you said, if the player never finds the fun, the game isn't fun.
Mm-hmm.
And those Nook Miles are such great, like, kind of flagpoles for, like, hey, go here to do this, and like maybe you'll like it. And if you don't, you never have to do it again. You just collect your miles and you move on with your life. But hey, it might be a thing that you become obsessed with, like collecting all the critters from around the island, or whatever. You're like going on these like crafting quests of like getting progressively better crafting materials and crafting results, or upgrading your house and making it so that it's so much better, and like reaching the end goal of finally paying off your mortgage to Tom Nook. And whatever your favorite part of Animal Crossing New Horizons is, those Nook miles probably helped guide you towards it.
Yeah, I think the tangibility, I think, is really the important thing. And I played tons of Wild World on DS, and I played a good amount of 3DS too. But I think having that sense of progression is key to a game like this. And I think we've seen more Animal Crossing likes that have come out since then try and do the same thing. I think there's a real sense of, having players feel like they're making progress, even though it's a game where what really is progress in Animal Crossing, that's kind of hard to define.
Yeah, I mean, it's really whatever goal you want to work towards, right? Like for me, it was paying off the mortgage and getting like the fully upgraded house that I could customize different rooms. And then, but also like I wanted to have as complete of a critter collection as I possibly could, or get my favorite villagers, or animal, whatever they're called, the animal residents, get as many of like my favorites from there on my island. And like I know for some people that was like the end game of like waiting
Mm-hmm.
for your favorite animal to come to the island and then convincing them to stay, and then like building kind of like your dream team of Animal Crossing characters on your island was such like a major quest, and people would time travel just to get to them. And that was actually something that the studio tried to curve a little bit. They were like, they didn't want to outright discourage it, because like this is a game where they wanted to kind of encourage players to play however they wanted to, but they implemented a bunch of ways that like players could like avoid having to time travel, like making it so that a lot of the benefits that you would get from time traveling was just baked into the game, of like, okay, well now you can craft your own stuff, or you can do stuff at all hours of the night, or there were fewer time-based restrictions, but that did not stop some
Yeah.
people from continuing to do it.
I remember, I think when the game came out, one thing people were mixed on, wasn't it, that like you could only have one island when one save. I
Yeah.
remember that being kind of a sticking point for people, but it turned into a phenomenon that like most people just didn't care.
Yeah. So one of the things that developers saw in older games when they were watching players start up their save file is they noticed that some players would reset their save file over and over and over again to get the island shape that they wanted. So for New Horizons, they added landscaping. That was another big addition there. And they announced this game in 2018, which I don't know if you remember. You've been in this game a long time as well,
Yeah.
Hayes. But people would like make jokes of like, is this finally the Nintendo Direct where we're going to get Animal Crossing? It's kind of like how like
Yeah.
people are now with Hollow Knight Silk Song, where it's like they have kind of like the seancing circle, and it's like a copy of Animal Crossing for GameCube sitting in the middle of it.
Yeah. And I mean, Animal Crossing at that time wasn't the like giant that it is now. It was still like
Very niche.
one of their more niche series.
Yeah, but it was still like kind of the internet darling of like, oh man, if it'll be a dream come true if they announce Animal Crossing on Nintendo Switch. And like I said, like 2012 was the last mainline Animal Crossing game. Like there was Happy Home Designer on 3DS, and
Oh yeah, there's like a
was that
board
Wii U
game
too,
one.
right? Or no, Wii U was the board game one. You're right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there were like these spin-offs that like made it seem like, okay, yeah, they don't really care about this franchise anymore. They're just using the name recognition to instead of putting out generic board game or generic home customization game, like they're gonna slap the Animal Crossing name on it and then sell you some amiibo cards in order
Hmm.
to generate extra revenue. So I think that a lot of people were like, no, we have put up with all of this like side crap. Give us the mainline entry that we desire. And they finally did. They gave it to
Hmm.
us, announced it in 2018 for a release in 2019, but then they had to announce a delay to March 2020. And according to an article on Variety, the cause of the delay was because then fairly new Nintendo of America president Doug Bowser wanted to instill a culture that avoided crunch and provided a healthy work-life balance for all Nintendo employees. So can't be mad at that.
Yeah, and of course, when the delay happens, saw a million people on Twitter post the Miyamoto quote anytime any Nintendo game gets delayed.
Which we don't know is actually a real
Yeah,
Miyamoto quote.
it
It's
may
like one
not
of those
actually be real.
mythologized quotes about you're referring to the one of like a rushed game is bad, but a delayed game is eventually good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or a rushed game is forever bad, but a delay, which is no longer even pertinent because there are so many patches and everything that you can
Yeah.
look at Final Fantasy 15, which I loved at launch, but they completely revamped entire chapters of that game to make
Oh yeah,
it
that
better.
game. I was talking to someone recently. That game is drastically different now than it was when it launched.
Yeah. So, I mean, not as pertinent of a quote, but yeah, the spirit lives on of like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd much rather these developers have a healthy work-life balance, not have to work like just absurd hours for weeks on end. Like we've heard horror stories. I mean, when I did my Wind Waker episode, there was a quote that I think it was from Eiji Aonuma, who was like, yeah, like I was just sleeping at the Nintendo headquarters for so long that eventually people started showing up in winter coats, and I said, "Oh, it must be winter outside."
Oh my God, that's awful.
That is. So I'm glad that seems to not be the culture there anymore, though I'm sure, especially for a company that takes quality as seriously as Nintendo, I'm sure that there are very stressful and probably intense times of development. But it's good to see that there's at least the effort being put in, which is more than you can say for some studios.
Yeah, talking about the way that games are made, the one thing that has always stood out to me about New Horizons is that Nintendo didn't have a more like robust post-launch support for that game.
Yeah.
Because if they had launched like a paid expansion, people would have bought that for
I mean,
that
they
game.
did. They did launch a paid
I
expansion,
guess
but
technically, yeah.
it was built into the Switch Online Plus expansion pack. If you wanted to have that, you would get that for free,
Hmm.
which was a pretty brilliant move to bolster subscriber numbers. Animal Crossing New Horizons released on March 20th, 2020, and received a 90 out of 100 on Metacritic. Game Informer was actually right in line with that, giving it a 9 out of 10 when we reviewed it back in 2020. And through a confluence of events, not the least of which was everybody was stuck in their homes due to the country's reaction to the rise of the COVID-19 pandemic, it became the hottest game on the planet for several weeks on end. Hayes, I'm assuming you were all about Animal Crossing New Horizons during that period.
For a little bit, yes. When it came out, I played it for a couple months, and then I decided I was gonna try Final Fantasy 14 again. And you know my coverage, so you know how that went.
Yes,
So
all consuming.
I spent most of the pandemic playing Final Fantasy 14 and watching Impractical Jokers. But
Okay.
I did play New Horizons a bit with my partner because she was in Kansas at vet school during that time.
Oh, okay.
So it was a good way for us to kind of like have something to do together when she had time.
I mean, that was my experience with it as well. Like, I played a lot solo, but then the addition of online play, which is the first entry that had online play, it really allowed people to just, hang out with friends on
Hmm.
these islands that we've been building on our own. And then like also you can send gifts to each other, all kinds of like interactive elements. It really felt like the perfect game because it's also so wholesome
Oh yeah,
in
it's
a
the
time
like
where it was so dark.
the perfect antidote to like all the existential dread of the world collapsing.
Yeah. And I mean, people now like they might be like, "Oh, there was an overreaction or whatever," but like back then it really did feel like the world was
Yeah.
crumbling around us. Like I remember like that one, I think it was like March 13th of 2020 where like the NBA season was postponed and like Tom Hanks had COVID and it was just like, "Oh my
Yeah,
God,
I
what's
guess, I mean,
happening?"
part of the hard part was we just didn't know. We didn't know anything about it. So stay home and isolate and get tested and wait until we figure more out about it. So
And play Animal Crossing New Horizons.
yeah.
So I actually experienced this game. I mean, I didn't experience it, but I watched it from a unique perspective because I got to watch the reviewers. Joe Juba was our primary reviewer, I believe, and then Jeff Cork was helping him out. They got to play it in person together, which was very fun because I don't think a lot of people on the planet got that experience, given that everybody was kind of quarantining around the time of launch. I mean, obviously now you can play it with
Hmm.
friends in person, but like watching two people sit at a desk together with their own individual switches playing the game was kind of an unheard of concept in March 2020.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think I've ever now that you said, I've never played that game in person with someone. The only times I played it with people has been online.
Yeah, it was an interesting time to have that game come out. Now, let me ask you this. You mentioned Impractical Jokers, you mentioned Final Fantasy 14. Are either of those like the piece of media that you are immediately taken back to? Like, I think a lot of people would say like Tiger King is like their quintessential COVID piece of media. For me, it's The Last Dance,
Hmm.
the Chicago Bulls documentary that came out. Would you say that it's Impractical Jokers, Final Fantasy 14, something else?
For me, it's definitely Final Fantasy 14 because it kind of had that same effect as Animal Crossing, whereas like I being isolated, not interacting with anyone, and my partner like being in another state, playing 14 gave me a way to interact with people and even meet people in some regards. And of course, I'm a massive Final Fantasy fan, so it was like a combination of interacting with others and getting to play this great Final Fantasy story that I'd never seen. That's easily what I go back to. Not to mention the fact that, you know, kind of the second half of my career writing about games kind of was kickstarted by covering that game. So it is very much like the definitive piece of the pandemic for me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, The Last Dance, Animal Crossing New Horizons, maybe Doom Eternal, which came out the same day, which is a fun juxtaposition.
Yeah, it was the first Barbenheimer,
It
basically.
was. I made a meme that said Nook Eternal and Photoshopped Tom Nook's head on the Doomslayer's body and, put Nook in like the same font as Doom. It was funny at the time. And now you look back, you're like, okay. So Hisashi Nogami, the guy who I mentioned was a producer on this, but he's also the creator and director of the Splatoon series. He had a quote that he provided to The Verge around this time. He said, quote, "We've been planning this release for quite some time, so it's unfortunate that this timing overlapped with what's currently happening in the world. I'm very disheartened and saddened by the events happening across the world. Considering the timing, we hope that a lot of the Animal Crossing fans will use this as an escape so they can enjoy themselves during this difficult time." And they sure did. And celebrities also got in on the fun. So notable celebrities that were playing Animal Crossing during this time included Elijah Wood, Danny Trejo, T-Pain, Guy Fieri, and Brie Larson. They were all notable people, notable celebrities who were playing New Horizons. Chrissy Teigen even put up an Animal Crossing inspired stir fry recipe on her recipe website. And then on top of that, the writer of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, Gary Whitta, also former games journalist,
Hmm.
started a talk show entirely within Animal Crossing called Animal Talking.
I remember that. I actually watched a little bit of that. It was a really cool idea.
It was. So yeah, basically like the concept is a late night talk show similar to like what you would see like, Conan or Colbert or Jimmy Fallon, and like he had like a whole set in his Animal Crossing house where celebrities would bring their Animal Crossing avatars to his island and do an interview entirely through Animal Crossing. It was a very fun concept. And then Joe Biden, his presidential campaign, created an island and put out Biden 2020 yard signs that you could take and put in your own island.
I forgot
And
about that.
after that, democracy advocates in Hong Kong used it for virtual protests. And then after that, Nintendo said, we don't want to do political stuff on this game anymore. So November 2020, political activities were banned in Animal Crossing. So I guess that explains why Kamala Harris made a Fortnite island instead of an Animal Crossing island for her campaign last year. Unfortunately did not have the impact that Animal Crossing apparently had.
That's what Roblox is for. You can do everything in Roblox.
Exactly. So Animal Crossing New Horizons was nominated for Game of the Year and Best Multiplayer Game at the Game Awards 2020, but it only took home the award for Best Family Game at that show. And in the time since release, it received several content updates, seasonal updates, and in 2021, that premium DLC we talked about earlier, Happy Home Paradise, which let you go to other islands and design vacation homes for villagers. And that DLC was released for $25. But as I mentioned earlier, if you have the Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack, it is included in that subscription. today it actually sits comfortably as the second best-selling Nintendo Switch game of all time, with the latest number being around 47.5 million units sold, which is second only to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which nothing is catching those sales
No.
numbers.
And it still charts in Japan. Sometimes when I look at the weekly sales numbers, like Animal Crossing still is on there almost every week. It's and Mario Kart. It's ridiculous how the legs that those games have in Japan specifically.
Yeah, I mean, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in particular is easily one of Nintendo's best-selling games of all time now.
Mm-hmm.
And Animal Crossing's not that far. I mean, it's outside of striking distance. Like, it's never going to catch Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But like it's nothing's gonna catch it either, right?
Well,
like
it's sold more than like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom combined. Basically.
Yeah, it's like number 1 Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and then like a couple notches down, number 2 Animal Crossing New Horizons, and then like 12 notches down below that is the next game, which I think is Smash Ultimate.
Might be Smash Ultimate, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's number 3.
Or and a Pokemon game might be there too.
I think Pokemon Sword and Shield is the highest selling Pokemon game, and I think that's at like number 5 or 6.
That sounds
Sword and Shield and Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet are like neck and neck right now.
Yeah.
But where do you think the Animal Crossing series can even go from here?
I don't know, honestly, because it's that, New Horizons was such a phenomenon, but we've seen such a boom of like live service games and social experiences and stuff that I just don't think that they can do. I don't think they can do another like same formula thing. And I think the logical next step would be some kind of MMO structure.
Oh, really? Yeah, I guess like a cooperative island building or village building.
Yeah, and it would maybe make sense because I think it was last year Nintendo had that really like secretive playtest thing that people signed up for, and you couldn't talk about it. But then, of course, as soon as it went live, everyone said, "Oh, they're testing an MMO." So I could see a situation where Nintendo's playing around with those ideas and kind of turns Animal Crossing into some kind of MMO-like experience. I don't think they would go straight MMO because Nintendo is not, they always put their own unique twist on something. So I think it would be an MMO-like experience.
And not to mention, like with the mouse functionality of the new Joy-Cons on Switch 2, I think that would fit really well. I think more intricate city building mechanics or
construction stuff.
Yeah,
it'd be perfect for that.
That would be incredible. That would be such a cool twist. And I think that would fit in with the team's desire to have it be like, still faithful to those core mechanics that longtime fans love, while still making it feel like it's not like just a complete retread of a past game. And that worked out pretty well for New Horizons.
Yeah, and I think the series has enough notability now that you could kind of centerpiece it as this like social experience on Switch 2.
Yeah. And I mean, it's going to be a massive hit. Like everybody got into Animal Crossing New Horizons, and it like we've said, second best selling game on Nintendo's most successful console ever.
Yeah, and because of the boom during COVID, like I said, everyone knows the name Animal Crossing now. Even people that didn't play it a lot, they know the name, and that's key.
I mean, nowadays, like before, I would say it was like a D or C tier franchise at best for as far as like recognizability in like especially in like the mainstream. Today, it's like an A tier with like only Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon being in that S tier.
So 100%, yeah.
They've got a moneymaker on their hands whenever they want to announce another Animal Crossing.
And I mean, it's been it came out 2020, right?
So 5 years.
It's been 5 years, so I would presume that they've got something in at least active development, at least.
Yeah, I think that 2025 is going to be quite a big year for Nintendo between the Switch 2, Pokemon Legends ZA, Metroid Prime 4. I would bet that we're going to get that new Mario Kart that they teased with the Switch 2.
Yeah.
And then I would also bet we're going to get a 3D Mario this holiday season. But I think 2026 is the year of Animal Crossing. Yeah, that's my personal prediction. I don't have any inside information there, but like I think 2026 is going to be when we hear about a new Animal Crossing game. Maybe they even announce it at the Switch 2 reveal, and then it's like, yeah, but it's coming 2026. I mean, it would be, but who knows though? Because like, think of how good 2017 was for Nintendo, and that was year one of the Switch. We got just an absurd murderous row of new releases. Like maybe they try to jam an Animal Crossing in there and just be like, hey, you need to buy the Switch 2, even if you have a Switch 1, it's working great, like right now, because you get a Mario Kart, a Mario game, and an Animal Crossing game. And I mean, I think that would be enough to convince a lot of people.
Well, I mean, there's also the question of Switch games that are boosted for Switch 2.
Oh yeah.
You know, there's been rumors of like enhanced Breath of the Wild, or even just straight out, you know, Switch games will play better on Switch 2, presumably. But I could see a situation where Nintendo is like promoting a certain lineup of games of like, yeah, you have your original Switch games. These ones are going to be better on Switch 2. And I could see New Horizons being a part of that, along with like Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey.
Yeah. Or do we get like Animal Crossing New Horizons Definitive Edition, like the like Xenoblade Chronicles X?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, we've seen so many like Definitive Edition games on Switch that I really don't think that's going to end anytime soon.
No, I don't. I would be surprised if they just did a definitive edition of New Horizons, given how popular that game was. Maybe they do some sort of like new gen upgrade, the way that like we've seen like PlayStation do it, where it's like, oh, if you own Horizon Zero Dawn, you can get the Horizon Zero Dawn PS5 version for $10. Like maybe we see something like that. That's kind of the blueprint I think a lot of people have come to expect. And it's like I would probably drop like a lot of money to do like all my favorite Switch games upgrade. Like obviously Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Wonder, Mario Odyssey, all those games. I hopefully that's not the case, because I would love it if it was just like, yeah, it just works better on Switch 2 the way like you do on Xbox.
If it's paid, there's a fine line, obviously. Like you don't want to pay full price, but I don't know, maybe I'd be willing to pay $20 for a game I really like, an enhanced version.
But for now, if you want to check out Animal Crossing New Horizons for the first time or return to it after listening to this episode, you know exactly where to find it, either currently on your Switch or on the Switch eShop. But Hayes, we are going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we will be getting your thoughts on Xenoblade Chronicles X and the new Definitive Edition. We will be right back. We are back, and I think it's pretty safe to say we are on the tail end of the Switch's life cycle, because over the last year and a half, it has really felt like Nintendo has been wringing out the washcloth with either lesser-known games or remasters or what have you. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying those games are bad, but I think post Tears of the Kingdom and Super Mario Wonder, it's been a bit of a drop-off in terms of all new games. And the biggest benefactor of these remasters have been those who skipped the Wii U generation. And with a few exceptions, like something like Yoshi's Woolly World, most of the best Wii U games have made it onto Switch. And the latest of which is Xenoblade Chronicles X, which finally joins the rest of the Xenoblade Chronicles games on the Nintendo Switch. Hayes, I know you are a big fan of the franchise. I have never played a Xenoblade Chronicles game. What am I missing?
Oh man, Xenoblade Chronicles is the best modern JRPG series. I would even put it past Persona. I mean, and I love Persona, but I think Xenoblade Chronicles is like the definitive modern JRPG series in terms of like forwarding that idea of a JRPG. And Xenoblade Chronicles X specifically is, anyone that played it on the Wii U has probably been yelling at everyone for years that like, this is the one game that needed a Switch version. If you were going to bring any game from the Wii U to Switch, it would be this game. So it only took us to the very end to get here, but we finally have it.
Yeah, the good news is it will be backwards compatible. I mean, presumably it'll be backwards compatible. It'd be very funny if Nintendo was like, yeah, because like they've said like, you know, certain games are not going to be backwards compatible from the Switch. I'm assuming it's going to be something like Ring Fit Adventure or something that requires peripherals like Labo. It would be very funny if they're like, actually, Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, this game that you've been all waiting for so long to come over, you had like 6 months to enjoy it on our flagship console, and now it's irrelevant again. But what is the typical gameplay feel of a Xenoblade Chronicles game?
So it's weird to talk about because Xenoblade Chronicles X is extremely different from all of the other games. All of the other games are very character narrative driven experiences, with somewhat MMO-ish kind of combat where you have a toolbar and you're picking skills off a toolbar and they're on cooldowns. The other really good comparison is like Final Fantasy 12. It's very Final Fantasy 12-ish in terms of like active combat that's not quite turn-based but has an element of turn-based to it. But like I said, the Xenoblade Chronicles 1, 2, and 3 are all very narrative-driven experiences that are all connected, and Xenoblade Chronicles X is not quite like that. It's without getting too complicated, it's maybe connected to the rest of the series. We don't totally know. And it's also maybe connected to a trilogy of games called Xenosaga that were on the PlayStation 2.
Mm-hmm.
But this game is all about exploration. It is a extremely exploration-focused game. It still has a strong narrative, but it's more about telling the story of like a community. Because essentially the setup is that America factors into it, but Earth has made contact with aliens, but the way they made contact was that these two highly advanced alien civilizations fought a war above Earth, and essentially Earth got caught in the crossfire and got destroyed. And it launched these colony ships, and you were on a colony ship called the White Whale that is presumably the only one that survived. And you crash land on this alien planet called Mira, and you set up shop there with this city that's New Los Angeles. And presumably you are the only humans left in the entire universe. And you have to survive on this alien planet and chart it and explore it and help humanity survive, essentially.
I wonder why they chose Los Angeles as the city to carry forward.
I don't know. I think part of it is that Los Angeles kind of has this reputation as being this like diverse melting pot of a city.
Mm.
And one of the themes of the game is meeting all of these alien races, which they call Xenos in the game, and kind of integrating them into human society. And so it becomes like this melting pot. And they talk about the nature of Los Angeles as a city sometimes. And I think I've never found out for sure, but thematically that kind of is the idea behind it, I think.
And I mean, New York would be the other one, but that already has new in the name, so they can't just be like New York.
Exactly. Yeah.
Newer York.
Yeah.
So as somebody who has played all the Xenoblade games, how similar or different is that from like the narrative of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 through 3, or even just the themes of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 through 3?
So the best way to describe Xenoblade X is that it's side quest the game, essentially. Okay. Its narrative is delivered entirely through side quests and companion quests. You do have main quests, but essentially it's a little weird to describe, but the world map is broken up into these like hex tiles. It's this whole map of hex tiles, and each tile is what's called a segment. And every segment has an objective to achieve. And doing that basically unlocks the segment and contributes to your exploration rate. So like some segments will be probes that you set that can mine resources or give you money. Some will have a dangerous enemy to defeat. Some will have a chest to find. Some get filled in with quests that you complete. And so literally everything you're doing in the game is contributing to that exploration score, which then gives you further rewards and unlocks more quests and unlocks more story. So it's like a more concrete version of something like Dragon's Dogma or even Breath of the Wild. Going back to this game, I think in a lot of ways that you can kind of feel this as being a bit of a precursor to Breath of the Wild in terms of how that exploration focus is done, and how that exploration is done through landmarks and like sight lines and things like that. And again, Monolith was a support studio on Breath of the Wild. So it feels like a game that, a lot of people didn't play it on Wii U. And Wii U also didn't have a lot of people that bought the system.
Yeah,
So
it's
this is
already
a
a very
game.
small pool of players, and then a relatively niche franchise
Yeah.
coming to a relatively niche console. You're going to get a pretty low player base for that.
Yeah, this is a game that not a lot of people knew about. But I think Dragon's Dogma is a really good comparison in the way that going back to this game now 10 years later, it feels drastically ahead of its time.
Mm.
The whole open world focus and exploration focus it's a fascinating way to go through a game. And I think the conception you'll hear a lot of people say is that the other Xenoblade games have good stories and this doesn't have a story. But I think that misses the point in that the story in this game is just as ambitious as every other Xenoblade game. It's just delivered a lot differently. Because I think story is still a major focus here, but it's more about learning about the culture and society of New Los Angeles and the people that live there, and then learning about these aliens that come in.
So in the Xenoblade Chronicles game, is Earth destroyed there too?
Yes.
Okay.
The setup for Xenoblade, the first Xenoblade, is that this researcher essentially was conducting an experiment to basically like harness a black hole. And he basically destroys the Earth and splits it into two different universes.
Which is good because our scientists on our Earth also try to do that from time to time, which is,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. So it goes without saying, these are all the Xenobladed games, X included, are very long games. They're all 100-hour games with lots of side quests, lots of exploration, very long stories, lots of cutscenes. So they are the like quintessential idea of RPG.
Mm.
But a lot of what makes them so special is kind of the way that they tell their stories and the emotion that's packed in there. Phenomenal voice acting across the board. One of the weird things that the Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 are known for is their localizations are heavily done with British and Scottish accents. Xenoblade X isn't like that, which I think maybe is because you're in New Los Angeles,
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. But it's these are very fun games that are really superbly realized worlds to get lost in. I think the thing that these games do better than almost anything out there is the scale of the world. Just the feeling as you're going through these worlds and you're seeing these massive areas and these massive alien planets. Like Xenoblade X, the planet of Mira is this massive open world with 5 different areas, and it's all seamless, which was incredible on the Wii U. There's a loading screen if you go into like a building or something, but when you go out into the open world, you can go anywhere in it without any loading whatsoever.
Mm.
The other key defining trait of X is that it takes a long time, but basically halfway through the game, you unlock a mech called a Skell, which lets you, it's the same kind of gameplay, but suddenly you have a mech that you can control and explore, and you can fly around the planet. So like halfway through the game, it kind of turns into a different game that's like a Gundam game almost or something.
Yeah, I've seen that. I remember reading about that back when I was pretty new at Game Informer, and like reading these previews about this, and then ultimately the review, and being like, okay, that sounds like the game I want to play. It's like flying around in these mechs or skells and fighting enemies that way. You described it as kind of like side quest the game. And the two games that immediately come to mind for me when I think of like this game is just almost entirely comprised of side quests, with some sprinkling in of like, okay, well, this is a main objective, but really, in essence, all of the side quests are main objectives because, if everything's a side quest, everything's a main objective, basically. Majora's Mask and Lightning Returns. Those are the two that I kind of see as like side quests the games. Is there any similarities between those games and this?
I could see that. Yeah. There's not any like time mechanics necessarily, but the general structure of it is very the same. Like, the main quests have cutscenes and stuff, but structurally they're all the same as the rest of the side quests that you get. So, you know, you are doing activities that are quote unquote side quests in most games, like gathering materials or going to talk to this person, but all of the narrative of Xenoblade X is delivered through those activities. So I think the thing that makes this game special is that all of those kind of like generic activities that you would normally do in most games have some kind of narrative attached, some kind of story importance attached to it.
Got it. Okay. So this version, Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, remastered graphics,
Yep.
Continuation of the narrative, including an all-new area, from my understanding.
Yeah, there is a epilogue basically that adds a new area, like a new alien race, and new story elements that are. I haven't beaten the epilogue yet, but it has some interesting tidbits for people that are very into Xenoblade lore or the lore of Monolith Soft, basically.
And this is the only continuation that this story has gotten, right? There hasn't been any other continuation that I know of anyway, right?
No, it's weird. Technically no. But the
It's one of
expansion
those.
the expansion for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that came out has a story detail in it that theoretically could link it to Xenoblade X.
Okay. And do you think that ultimately is the reason that they were like, oh, we should bring this to Switch?
Potentially, yeah. I think that's part of it. I think the other factor is that despite, Xenoblade is still a niche series. I think Xenoblade 3 sold like 3 or 4 million copies, which is remarkably good for a niche RPG. But they've become like one of Nintendo's star studios, surprisingly. Because they put out on Switch, they put out Xenoblade 2, an expansion for Xenoblade 2, Xenoblade 3, an expansion for Xenoblade 3, Xenoblade Chronicles 1 Definitive Edition, Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, and they helped on development of Breath of the Wild, Splatoon 2, Splatoon 3, Tears of the Kingdom, and Animal Crossing.
Yeah,
so they have
pretty substantial resume for that studio.
Yeah, and it kind of like the studio that makes the Yakuza games. Like, I don't know how they're making all these games.
Yeah, RGG is just prolific, and Monolith, they have a big team from what I understand, but like even then, like
these are big games. Every Xenoblade game is huge. It's 100 hours. It's unique environments. It's a unique story. It's like, I don't know how they're doing what they do, but I think it's interesting that Xenoblade now, I believe, is the only Nintendo franchise that is completely playable on one system.
Yeah, I mean, your immediate thought would be like, oh, Mario or Zelda, but famously Twilight Princess and Wind Waker and Link Between Worlds are not on Switch. And then I'm sure there's there's so many Mario games. There's Mario Galaxy 2. That's the one that everybody's wanting. It's not on there. Neither is most of the handheld games, like the DS and 3DS ones.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of, Xenoblade, despite being niche, has gotten a lot of attention over the years. A lot of people have started talking about it. The people that love it really love it and really talk about it.
They sure do.
And I think going into Switch 2, I think that Monolith is going to be an important studio. So I think a lot of the work they've done on Switch has potentially prepared them for whatever is coming next.
Well, didn't Nintendo officially acquire them now?
Yes.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago that they did that.
Well, hold on, because I'm seeing 2007 they became a parent company, but I feel like it was a lot more recent than that.
I thought it was too, yeah.
But, okay, so it looks like it relocated to be closer to Nintendo physically in 2022.
Okay.
But it looks like Nintendo acquired them in 2007. But there's probably something else that I'm missing here just through the skimming of a Wikipedia page.
I guess Nintendo increased its stake of Monolith to 96% in 2011.
Okay, it still feels more recent than that.
Yeah.
But, the studio does have about 230 staff in total. So
they just hired... Interestingly, there's some news last week that they just hired the cutscene director that worked on Final Fantasy 16 and Final
Yeah.
Fantasy 7 Remake.
Both, fantastic games full of amazing cutscenes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. This definitive edition also has all the DLC from the base game, which, from what I understand, is like there was more DLC in the Western version than there was the Japanese version, or maybe I'm getting
Yeah,
that backwards.
there were extra party members that you could only get through DLC. And weirdly, there was also DLC, quote unquote, on Wii U, where you could download extra files to a flash drive to have better
What?
textures in the game. It was like a graphical upgrade DLC.
Yeah, so there's two new companion characters in this version as well, but you touched on like the upgraded textures and all that stuff. How does this game look and run? Because I think that's a lot of concern that people have for any game that comes out on Switch these
Yeah,
days.
it genuinely looks fantastic. I've had a little bit of slowdown in handheld mode in some of the like busier areas, like in New LA where there's a lot going on, but the performance is almost flawless, and it was on Wii U. This was by far the most impressive looking game on Wii U, and I think I genuinely think it's one of the more impressive looking games on Switch now. It has held up remarkably well, and the big change I think with the graphical style on Switch is the character models. Like they
Mm,
very much changed the character models to feel more in line with the other Xenoblade games. So they're
got
a
it.
little more like anime-esque now.
All right, and I've heard that the soundtracks to these games are completely beloved, but I've also seen that I think X's soundtrack might be a little bit more
It's a little
divisive.
divisive, yeah. Xeno, Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 are mostly composed by Yasunori Matsuda,
Hmm.
and they're very sweeping orchestral stuff. They have some weird stuff in there, but Xenoblade X, for all intents and purposes, the reason this game didn't get quite the attention it should have when it came out, I think, is because it veered wildly off the first Xenoblade. Like it's so different, and that includes the soundtrack, which is like rap and hip hop, and it's just like a weird, bizarre mix of genres. Like the main battle theme is a rap song called Black Tar,
Hmm.
and it's just it's so different. It's hard to really quantify like how different this game is from the first Xenoblade game. Even though the further you get into it, you can still see some of like the structural similarities.
Yeah, it feels like there's just a little bit of like this weird, like kind of like clash with like, oh,
Yeah.
you're thinking like this, it's this like fantasy sci-fi game, and then you have a rap song playing. It's almost like when you see like a game that takes place in like a really far back era, like Assassin's Creed Shadows, and it's like suddenly there's like a modern-ish licensed song playing in like a
Yeah.
cutscene or like a commercial, and you're like, that feels weird. Like I'm used to like
Yeah.
more like kind of like an authentic sound coming from that.
I guess a weird way to describe it is if you think of the first Xenoblade as like Star Wars kind of science fantasy, then Xenoblade X is like Stargate.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. Hayes, to close this segment out, for people who are listening to this and they are in the same boat as me, they've never played a Xenoblade Chronicles game. If they wanted to pick one up, like you said, the entire series is on Switch now. Would you recommend Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, maybe 3 because that's the most recent one, or should they just start with the original Xenoblade Chronicles?
I think the best place to start for most people would be Xenoblade Chronicles 1 Definitive Edition
Oh,
on
okay.
Switch. Um, if you're someone that like is really into open world games and really into exploration, then I'd say maybe start with Xenoblade X. But for most people, start with Xenoblade 1, which is on Switch.
But you're liking Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition quite
I
a bit.
I love it. Yeah. I liked it a lot when it came out, but it's one of those games that going back to I have liked it even more than when I played it.
So we're going to be doing definitive ranking in the next segment, but I'm going to put you on the spot here. Rank the 4 Xenoblade Chronicles games. Go.
Oh man. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 at number 4. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition at 3. Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition at 2, and Xenoblade 3 at number 1.
Yeah, that falls pretty much in line with what I've heard as well. But I've heard, X kind of fluctuates depending on your
Yeah.
taste for the different conventions introduced in there. But Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition is available on Switch as you are listening to this podcast. Hayes, we are going to take one final break, and when we come back, we'll be doing definitive ranking and eShop Gem of the Week. We'll be right back. We are back, and it's time for Definitive Ranking, a recurring segment where we take a Nintendo topic and give our own personal top 5 lists. Since this episode was focused on a well-liked Wii U game finally coming to Switch, Hayes, I wanted to get your top 5 Wii U games that are playable on Switch. So start at 5, count it down to 1, give us a sentence or two about each, but I will say, I'll go ahead, for me at least, Breath of the Wild doesn't count.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So yeah, the floor is yours. Start with 5 and count it down to 1.
I think 5 I'm going to go with, it's a long name, Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE Encore. The Shin Megami Tensei meets Fire Emblem RPG. That's just really weird.
I've tried to play it.
Extremely colorful and about pop idols, and it's an acquired taste, but I like it.
I tried playing that right off of playing Persona 5 for the first time and being like, oh, well, like I'd love to have like more of that style of game. And I was like, what is this?
Yeah, it is not Persona at all.
No.
Four, I think I'd have to do Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury.
Okay.
I think that's just a very good game. And I liked Bowser's Fury a lot. It's very short, but I think as kind of like a more open Mario experience, it's very interesting.
It's a very good proof of concept.
Yeah, something I'd like to see more of in the future. 3, I'm going to have to go with Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. Just because I'm big into Musou games, like we said. Mm-hmm. I think Definitive Edition has a lot of cool additions, like Linkle especially is pretty cool. Concept for a character, and just having a better performance in a Musou game is very nice.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's not the 3DS version of this game, that's for sure.
Two, I have to go Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, because what can you even say that's not good about that game? It's just, it is the best Mario Kart game ever made. It has incredible expansions, incredible tracks, characters. Everything about that game is just great. And then 1 now is going to be Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition.
Wow.
Because I think Xenoblade X was top 3 games on the Wii U, and I think this version makes it there's so many smart, like, quality of life changes, not to mention the extra story and the graphical update. Like, there's just so many smart changes that make it play so much better than ever before.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear it. I mean, it's always nice when a port comes over and it's just a very, very good representation of what made that game so great in the first place. And I'm talking to you during the last segment. That definitely seems to be what this is.
Yeah. And it's just so much more than just putting the game on Switch. It's so much more than that.
Meaningful additions, meaningful improvements. It sounds like that's awesome. And it's your favorite Wii U game that has come to Switch now. That's awesome. Let me ask you this, because last segment you said this was the game you've been waiting for to make the leap from Wii U to Switch. Mm-hmm. What is now your most wanted Wii U port to Switch? Is there even one remaining?
I don't think there is, actually, because the only other one I would have said is Tokyo Mirage Sessions, but that came over too. So I can't. I'm trying to remember the name of it. There was one game, a non-Nintendo game, but it was like it was an anime-esque game where you had a flashlight and you're like a kid.
Fatal Frame?
No, I can't remember what it is, but there's not like an answer that really jumps out to me at this point.
For me, it's Yoshi's Woolly World. Yoshi's Crafted World is great, but I think Woolly World's a little bit better, and it's different enough that it wouldn't be like cannibalizing it. Mm-hmm. I would also love to have Splatoon 1 just for the campaign make the leap over. Like, I don't even care if
Yeah,
they
that's a
bring
good
like
pick, actually. Yeah.
put it as DLC. Like those campaigns are criminally underrated.
Hmm.
And then I'll also say this is unpopular, but I will say it would have to require a lot of revamping and how it controls. But Star Fox Zero, just because I'm a Star Fox fan and I want a Star Fox game on my Switch.
I actually, now that you say that, I'd agree with you. I think Star Fox Zero's the pick that I'd have.
I think it is an actually bad game, but having, and I talked about this last week, I just want more Star Fox. I
I
want
do
more
too.
good
Yeah.
Star Fox. I don't think Star Fox Zero is good Star Fox.
No, it's a game with good ideas that are poorly executed.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I know that Miyamoto was really excited for that game to come out, and it just that
Hmm.
Nintendo has had a real slump with Star Fox ever since 64, which is
Because every
easily the
game
best.
is something drastically different. They try and do something completely new with every game, and it sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Varying degrees of not working, I would say, for that franchise ever since 64. Like, there's been a couple of decent ones, like in
Hmm.
particular Star Fox Assault
I
was
was going to
pretty
say that.
okay,
Yeah.
but still nowhere near as good as 64.
Yeah.
But that was a little embedded definitive ranking within definitive ranking, because now we're going to my list. Number 5 for me, New Super Mario Brothers U Deluxe. And I have talked a lot of smack about the New Super Mario Brothers series in recent years, especially when contrasted against Mario Wonder and that like, super expressive, super unique
Hmm.
art style. Uh, but when this came out, I got put on the review for it for Game Informer, and I remember playing through it, being like, "Okay, this is like so vanilla." And then like at a certain point, it clicked, and I was like, "Wait, this is actually like a pretty good platformer." And like
Hmm.
multiplayer is a lot of fun. The levels are designed in a way that like I think the level design outperforms the boring visual aesthetic of that game, and it doesn't feel as samey as I remember it feeling. And maybe it's because there was so much distance between playing Super Mario Brothers U, New Super Mario Brothers U, and New Super Mario Brothers U Deluxe, whereas there wasn't a whole lot of different like space between the New Super Mario Brothers games, when it was like, all right, we
Yeah.
two you, and it's like,
The
man, there's
3DS.
so
Yeah. They
many.
all
Yeah.
felt very samey at the time.
So I think with a little bit of space, I came to have a new appreciation for U Deluxe. It's still, number 5 for me.
I could see that. Yeah. Like good, solid Mario.
Yeah, I was like, okay, this is better than I remember it. Still not like my favorite Mario game by any stretch, but solid. Number 4 for me, Hyrule Warriors. Like you said, or like I said, Musu is not really my genre, but like you said, it's a very good Musu game, and it runs well, has a lot of fun like Easter eggs and like nods to Zelda lore as a whole, like whether like regardless of which Zelda timeline that you like or what era of Zelda you like it gives you a lot of fan service in that regard.
A lot of good rock renditions of Zelda
Oh
music,
yeah.
too. Yeah.
Maybe the best part of that game, to be honest, is the incredible soundtrack.
Hmm.
Number 3 is one that you did not mention, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker.
Oh, yeah.
A
That's a good pick.
fantastic little puzzle game. It was a spin-off, more or less, of Super Mario 3D World, because that was when Captain Toad started popping up with his dedicated levels. And this was a terrific puzzle game that I could still go back to and have a great time with. I love kind of like the diorama like style of level design and presentation. Just a fantastic underappreciated gem from the Wii U, and I'm glad that it got ported over to the Switch.
Yeah, I have too. I think, I think what might have made me forget that is that they put Captain Toad like sequences in Mario games after that.
Yeah. But it's so good, and I'm happy he has his own game, and I would love to see another Captain Toad Treasure Tracker in the future. Number 2, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Like, what is there to say? It's
Yeah.
the greatest Mario Kart game. It's the greatest game in one of Nintendo's most popular series, and it's so good and so complete. It makes you say, where could they possibly go next?
Hmm.
So I mean, and easily the best-selling game on Switch. And number 1 for me is another underappreciated game, but it was on your list, so I can't give it too much, chip on its shoulder status here. Super Mario 3D World. I think that is just an absolutely underrated 3D Mario game. I think I forget where we put it a couple weeks ago when Logan Plant and I did a tier ranking of all the mainline Mario games.
Mm.
It was either A or potentially even S tier was how high we ranked Mario
I agree.
3D World.
Yeah,
I
I
think a
agree.
lot of people overlooked it because of it being on the Wii U.
Yeah.
And then when it came to Switch, a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's just like kind of a a linear 3D Mario game. What's up with that?"
Yeah, I think people don't put it on the same level as other like 3D Mario's like Odyssey or something, which I think it really deserves to be. It's definitely a different format because of its like co-op focus, but I think it's just as inventive as something like Odyssey, honestly.
So much fun. It may be my favorite Wii U game of all time. It probably is, honestly, if you don't count Breath of the Wild, which I played Breath of the Wild on Switch, so I don't count it. But yeah, solid lists from both of us. Great games that came from the Wii U. I'm so happy that they got another lease on life on
Yeah.
the Switch. I mean, it's night and day, the sales numbers between the Wii U and the Switch. So it makes sense that they would bring so many games over. But Hayes, that brings us to our final segment of the show. It's the eShop Gem of the Week, a chance for you to give some shine to a game that might not otherwise get too much attention on the podcast. What is your eShop Gem of the Week?
Yeah, it is going to be Paranormasight, The Seven Mysteries of Honjo. It is
Okay.
a horror visual novel put out by Square Enix 2 years ago. And it's one of those like Square Enix has put out a lot of very weird little games recently in the last
Yes.
2 years. And I think this was one of the best because it is a visual novel. So, I would say if you're not into visual novels, I still think this can appeal to you, but go in knowing that it's a lot of dialogue, a lot of reading. But this is one of those really unique visual novels that plays with your perception of the kind of game it is and really integrates you into the experience. So, like, you as the player are integrated into the experience with things you have to do. Like, at one point, it tells you, hey, you have to yell at this character. What it doesn't say is you actually have to, like, yell into the microphone of the Switch. There's a part where it tells you you can't hear someone, so you have to go into the actual settings and turn up the volume so you can hear what the
Oh
person's
my
saying.
God.
So it has a lot of really cool little twists and quirks on top
Really
of
great
just being
encouraging people to yell into a system that can also be taken on planes.
yeah. On top of just having a genuinely good story. Like, it's a very good horror story that's directly inspired by like real urban myths in the area of Tokyo that it's based in. Like, these are actual urban myths that exist that the development team used to build this story. So it's very creepy, very moody, a very good like hand drawn kind of art style, and it just strikes the perfect balance, I think. And even if you're not into visual novels, I think this might be a good first try one to have.
I like that it seems like it takes place in like 1990s Tokyo.
Yeah, it's 80s Tokyo,
80s,
actually, like
okay.
late 80s. I want to say like 88 or something.
Okay, I was just going off the description here, which also the description ends with, like, it runs down all the feature lists and everything, and it says, once downloaded, you'll be able to play through the end of the game without any additional purchases required.
I mean, I guess that's a good thing.
You could say that about a lot of games.
Most games, yeah. I think
But
I think that might be there because it's also on smartphones.
oh, okay. Well, that
So
would
it
make
probably
sense.
comes from that.
It's just very funny to include that. But it's normally $20, but through March 26th, it is going to be on sale for $12.
There you
So
go.
if you are listening to this and that sounds up your alley, it came to Switch in March of 2023. So it's been out for a little bit. But if you somehow missed it like I did, no shame in the game, because that sounds like something that probably wouldn't get a lot of mainstream attention when it was announced or came out, but that makes it a perfect candidate for eShop Gem of the Week. So thanks for sharing that, Hayes, and thank you so much for joining me for this episode of All Things Nintendo.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a blast.
And thank you so much, everyone, for listening. As you know, my Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in, but you can also get in touch with me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com or hit me up on Blue Sky or Instagram at Brian P. Shea. That is also my YouTube channel name, and if you would subscribe to the channel, it would help the show out a lot. Hayes, tell everyone where they can find you online.
Yeah, you can find me at Blue Sky at Solfleet, S-O-L Fleet, or most of my writing at Inverse.com, as well as Rolling Stone Gaming.
That is our show for this week. Thank you all again so much for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode of All Things Nintendo, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons to the show. Abdullah, Adam Scott, Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chaps My Ass, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jackal, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Jill Grote, Johnny Five, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joshua DeProy, Cody Gibson, Creeper207, Megan S., Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sosa, Roberto Nieves, Roger Reichert, Russell Sayer, Smithy Poo, Tux DC, and Zek 3 Sword Sama. Thank you all so much for your continued support of the show.